Family mode.
And welcome to the webinar. Apologies for the late delay. We had some technical issues at the start. So as I said, welcome to the Clarion webinar on building and protecting the reputation of the PMO. This is the first in a series of webinars that we'll be running over the coming months on both project management, operational excellence and IT strategy. And this webinar is really designed for people who are establishing a project management office and those who are looking to move their PMO to the next level. So in terms of an agenda and what we're going to cover today, there's really a couple of points that we want to cover. First of all, I want to just share some background information with you in terms of the results of a survey that we did last year into project management practices in the Irish market and what that says about PMOs. And then I want to follow on from that and talk about things that people can do in a practical way to help improve the PMO. And really that involves looking at the role of the PMO in general, what the PMO is set up to do and what its services and functions are. Also looking at what the PMO can do in terms of building a broader level of project management capability in the organization and how we need to market the PMO. So just in terms of the survey, we conduct an annual survey into project management practices in the Irish market, and we ask a number of questions. And one of the questions we ask is how many organizations have a PMO, whether the PMO exists within the IT organization or the business organization or both. And you can see from the slide that there's a reduction in the number of organizations who have a PMO. So there's an increase in the number that don't have a PMO. And that's particularly the case within the IT organization, even though there is an increase in PMOs within business organizations. And the bottom line really for this slide is that the PMO is under pressure. And the PMO is under pressure in a number of ways. So first of all, PMOs that aren't seen to add value are being disbanded, and we're seeing that both in the survey and we're seeing it on the ground. It's also harder to convince organizations that they need a PMO in the first place. So if you're trying to establish a PMO, the battle to get the PMO up and running and get management support for a PMO is a harder battle. And the other thing that we would see coming across loud and clear is that a big part of the reason for this is that PMOs are not marketing themselves effectively, and they're viewed by too many people in organizations as being a management function. So the issue there really is that it's difficult to establish a PMO if you haven't already got one. If you've got one, you need to increase your value add and you need to demonstrate a value add. And if you don't do that, the speed at which you will be disbanded is much quicker than it would have been in the past. There is some better news in there. And that is that if you, in some organizations, PMOs are thriving, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the webinar, and why are PMOs thriving in those organizations, and generally that's because they are adding new services and actively meeting stakeholder needs. Okay, so just what can we do? Well, if you have a PMO, there's probably three things that you need to do. You need to look at the role of that PMO and what services are you providing. And particularly you need to look at, are you providing services that are designed to meet the needs of all the stakeholders and not just one group of stakeholders. Another thing that you can do and should do if you have a PMO is you should look at what's the role of the PMO in terms of building a broader level of project management capability at the organizational level. So not just at the individual project manager level, but at the organizational level. I've said it already, but I'll say it again. If you have a PMO, you need to market the PMO. You need to make sure that the business understands what the PMO is, why it exists, what business needs it's addressing, and what it's doing for the organization. And if you're trying to establish a PMO, I think the key message is that you should design the PMO very carefully and understand what is it going to do, what services will it provide, what's its goal, what are its goals, what are its objectives, rather than just starting a PMO with some vague idea of what the PMO might do. So in terms of services and looking at some of those areas, the slide shows a number of services that typically PMOs can offer. And it's usually PMOs that are quite mature that would offer all of these services. The key point for you if you are involved in a PMO is that you need to move over time to providing more services. So yes, it's fine if your PMO starts as an admin type function or if it's mainly involved in dealing with facilitating project requests, gathering status report and metrics. But over time, you need to be able to provide services that meet the needs of all stakeholders. So that's the executives, that's the sponsors, that's the project management community. It's not enough just to have a PMO that's providing executive information and doesn't do anything for the project management community. So some of the areas that you can look at are shown on the slide. So there are areas particularly where we would see very mature organizations with good, solid PMOs are looking more and more at things like capability development, resource management, and capacity planning, and seeing those as areas that they can add value in a PMO. So just on the next slide, I wanted to just really talk a little bit about where PMOs are. So in this slide, you see that there's a funnel diagram, and in the middle of the funnel, in the pipe, these are projects, and those projects are being executed using the project management methodology or the project management life cycle. Out on the left, you've got ideas and opportunities that have the potential to become projects. Now, the issue for many PMOs is that when they're looking at trying to improve project management practices and capability, they're stuck in the middle of this diagram. So they're in the pipe in the middle. So all their effort is on the process of project management. How can I get a good life cycle? How can I improve the life cycle? What templates do I have? How do I manage issues? How do I manage risks? And while all those things are necessary, as a PMO, you can't afford to be stuck in the middle. If you really want to add value over time, you also need to move to the left of the diagram. So you have to have a role in allowing people to decide what are the projects that they're going to do. So in the selection process, the PMO needs to be present and needs to be feeding information into that selection process and helping to shape those decisions. And if you can do that, then you will greatly increase the value add that you give to the organization. So the key point here really is that, yes, it's fine that you put a lot of effort and work into trying to improve project management processes, but you also need to look at how do we select, how do we broaden the remit of the PMO, what role can we play in the portfolio management, what role can we play in the selection of projects and in strategic alignment. So I just want to move on now to talk a little bit about building capability. And in our experience, building capability is something that a lot of PMOs don't pay enough attention to. And what you really need to do here is you need to think about the project management capability within the organization. So as well as trying to improve the overall level of capability of an individual project manager, you need to look at how can you build a greater level of project management capability broadly in the organization. And there are a number of things that you can do, and we'll explore a couple of them briefly here. So one of the first things that you can do is you can try and benchmark your existing capability and create a roadmap for the PMO that shows how that PMO will improve organizational capability. To do that, you need to take a maturity model approach. So you need to look at things like people, like process, like organization and technology. And you need to analyze your existing environment and capability under each of those headings and look at where is it now and where would you like to be. So that's a very important aspect for a PMO. And again, if you're doing that, you're making project management as a discipline much more relevant to the organization generally. There's also a lot that PMOs can do around providing training and development programs. And while a lot of PMOs would work with HR departments or external providers to provide training for project managers, it's much more than that. So this training and development needs to cover project managers, absolutely, but it also needs to cover sponsors and steering committees so that they're clear on what their role is within the project management process. And again, another thing that we're seeing more and more from our survey, we see a trend in an increase in certification. So more and more organizations looking to get project managers certified. We would like to see PMOs driving that process and encouraging certification and encouraging project managers to take up certification, because it's all part of the professionalization of project management within an organization. Another more practical, very practical thing that PMOs can do is help to encourage the establishment of project management communities within organizations. So this can be something as simple as where project managers meet as a group maybe every quarter to exchange information and share knowledge. They can provide input into the PMO around the project management methodology. They can provide input around processes, and they can look to learn from each other and share knowledge, so that hopefully over time people are able to learn from other people's mistakes instead of having to learn from the mistakes themselves individually. So that's a little bit about building capability. One of the last points that we want to talk about was really around the marketing of the PMO. And this is an area that probably a lot of professionals are not that comfortable with. So generally we would see people in PMOs who are involved in heads down activity around managing portfolios, looking at status reports, looking at governance, looking at all of those issues. A key thing in terms of the marketing of a PMO is that if you don't market the PMO, nobody else will market the PMO. So what you have got to do there is you've got to try and ensure that the role of the PMO is clearly understood. so that there's a broad understanding in the organization of what the PMO does, what business needs it addresses, why it was set up, what services does it offer, are they clearly defined, are they the right services, back to the earlier slide we talked about, are these the services that the organization needs. Another thing that's very important from a PMO point of view is that you can't assume that if you're happily working away in the PMO in the background, gathering status reports, providing executive information, that you're meeting the needs of stakeholders. So what you really need to do is you need to try and make sure that you're communicating regularly with those stakeholders, that you're taking the time to sit down and understand what are we doing for you that's good, what are we doing for you that's better, that could be better, what's happening on the ground, what other things could we provide. And one of the things that we would really encourage people to do is to develop a roadmap for the future direction of the PMO. So to have a strategy for your PMO that describes the PMO, what it does today, what we see it doing in a year's time and how that's different from what it does today and how that will add value, what we see it doing in 2 years' time. PMOs mature along a maturity curve over a number of years, and it's important that you set out that roadmap for the organization. So from a PMO perspective, you should be willing to develop a roadmap, and you should be very willing to try and share that roadmap. So I hope in this brief session that we've been able to give you some pointers around the PMO, what's happening in terms of the PMO and how the PMO is under pressure, and some practical things that you can do to try and improve how the PMO works in your organization and in your environment. So if there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them. So you should have the facility to use them on the conferencing. So any questions from anybody, we'd be happy to answer them. The material from the webinar will be made available to you by our marketing department. Any questions? Okay, we're not getting any questions, so hopefully that means that it's all very clear. So again, thanks for your attention. Thanks for signing up. Sorry about the delay at the beginning. We will be running a further series of webinars, and we'll be in touch with you about that. Also, just to let you know that if you want to have a conversation with any of our consultants around how you might improve project management practices in your organization or what you can do with your PMO, we'd be more than happy to have those conversations. Thanks very much for your attention. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.